Well, thank you so much for joining today. I really appreciate it. Amongst all of the things that you've got to do on a daily basis with everything that's going on in our world today, we can't thank you enough for joining us to spend a few minutes of your time thinking about something that's becoming incredibly important in today's world in regards to credits and incentives and government aid. And that's twofold. One is that how can you try to receive some assistance if you need it? And we've done some previous webinars regarding that topic, and we'll talk a little bit about that today too, and where to go to find where aid exists today. The other is that if you're currently getting some assistance or also interested in some assistance, what does it mean as far as the commitments and the compliance goes now and then into the future? And it's important because many companies really need a lot of help, and either now or in the past has received aid, and in today's current environment, it's becoming incredibly difficult to understand how best to go forward with a plan and a strategy of how to work through your compliance obligations, the kinds of commitments that many of you had made in full good faith and moving forward has now gone sideways for different reasons. And that we'll definitely get into some of those things today, and we look forward in doing that. A few housekeeping items just to go through briefly. For your convenience, just make sure that your line is muted. I think the system automatically does that for you, but just in case, please do that for us. There's a neat Q&A function. If you're interested in asking a question, we'll take any questions that come up at the end of today's presentation, which should last about 25 to 30 minutes in its totality to allow plenty of time for Q&A. But there's a function that's on your Zoom bar to easily ask something that we can address, well, hopefully if we have time, towards the end of today's webinar. And of course, this session is being recorded, so if you have to leave early or want some colleagues or other friends to see this in the future, we're going to be posting this on our website, social media channels, and other things if you want to come back to it at some future date. But we, of course, want to make sure first and foremost everyone is healthy, you're practicing the right kind of social distancing, and we really are thinking about everyone today in various ways that we're affected by today's environment with the pandemic, but not only that, but the recessionary items that are happening. We've always felt it's extremely important to get all our thought leadership out. And today's topic is really critical. Before we get into some of those details, though, just a quick background about us for those of you that might be not familiar with Hickey & Associates. So I'm the firm's president and CEO, Jason Hickey. Thank you again for joining us today. A little bit of background is that as we started in the mid-'80s as a firm, over the last 3.5 decades, we've grown globally, which is really exciting for us. Started in the U.S., great footprint there, but have grown to include some of the foremost experts in our field in many different corners around the world. And today we're going to talk about incentives, but we also focus on things like labor analytics and location strategy, logistics, and some other elements of what's typically called either site selection or location strategy. That's our little niche in the world. But today we're going to focus on incentives. I want to mention one more thing too that's incredibly important, and that's we've developed about a month ago, as things were starting to really engulf our environment around the pandemic and the need for a lot of government assistance now into the future. We actually set up a open source, really clearinghouse for emergency recovery incentives, recovery assistance in a way that we have never seen before. It's unprecedented, the kinds of trillions of dollars already made available for both individuals and for businesses. And a lot of those opportunities are charted out on the website you see at the bottom of your screen, incentives.hickeyandAssociates.com. It's constantly being updated in real time as governments from small, tiny little municipalities to prefectures and counties and states and national governments start to really release new ways that they can help companies get through these challenges that we're seeing unfolding in our very eyes, this website really help us identify what opportunities are out there. And of course, we're available at any time to help navigate things beyond just what's listed on the website. But use that, bookmark that site. We've had literally hundreds of thousands of unique visitors already. There is a deep need to get down to where aid and the connection between aid communities, and then we also have on the line today a lot of economic developers as well, who are a big part of the process. We're going to talk about that today as well. But utilize this as your resource. So the big question is, where are we now? And then what's next? And we're going to talk about a few different things first. And this is a U.S. specific topic that we're going to be handling today. I'll towards the end of the webinar talk about some additional sessions we're going to be holding. We're going to be focusing on EMEA, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and then also the Asia Pacific and Australia region. But today, we're mostly going to be focusing on the United States. And what's next is, first, to go back just a few weeks. A lot of things have happened. So there's been 3 major phases of relief so far that have passed congressional approval as well as executed by the U.S. President Trump. And that's an important process that's underway for phase 4. We'll get to that in a second. The first 3 phases allowed for emergency relief and response to what's happening with COVID-19. Phase 3, which is also very critical and probably gotten the most attention as of late, those are the beginnings of the programs that we're seeing to help aid companies and potentially getting those companies back to work. Phase 3 included, that was officially passed on March 25th, things like the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP that we see a lot about mentioned in the media, but also an incredible amount of other benefits, aid and assistance packages for a lot of different entities that range from communities, states, different type of infrastructure, the beginning of different type of infrastructure assistance, about $4.5 billion for programs that range from USDA Rural Development to the Economic Development Administration funds that they procure, community development, block grant, CDBG, all of those really started to get injected with capital as we see in this first phase. I think as future phases go on, phase 4 and beyond, we're going to see a lot of different types of assistance. So additional PPP funds, the Paycheck Protection Program, it was currently passed in the Senate. It's about $320 billion in assistance there. A lot of dynamics with it, but $60 billion has been set aside for small business, and as well as some other very specific channels that are more to help with minority served communities, businesses already set for some other specific items to help continue to diversify those PPP funds, like businesses that aren't represented by big banks or banks at all. They could go directly through the SBA. So there's a lot more dynamics associated with what's in the Senate bill. The House is taking it up right now, and we're expecting the process to conclude over the next few days with the president signing that legislation, allowing for more assistance to happen. Now, as you all know, Congress just got back on April 20th. They were away on recess. Just means many of them are back in their congressional districts and working on the many issues that are happening beyond just what Congress is working on specifically. The big challenge is we're going to see right away is that the Senate and Congress work on different rules. And then each party within each house of both the Senate and the House, but each part of branch of government work on separate political aspirations and challenges as well. So we're already seeing the underpinnings of what will be the next big phase, the phase 5, maybe 6 and 7. And that's assistance to get people back to work. It could come in the form of infrastructure, which we saw in the 2009 stimulus. It could come in additional assistance for states and communities, and there's already been a lot of dynamics spoken in the news maybe about that today, about what that means and what that might take place in the future. But undoubtedly, part of the biggest challenge that we're going to see is just the mechanics and the way that the federal government actually approves different opportunities in the future. Actually getting senators and Congress, men and women, back to the chamber to vote is one of the biggest issues. And the various different political thought processes that go into play there. So we're going to see some challenges. This is a very robust time too, when it comes to big gaps in the way that we think and the way that we want to perceive with different types of spending. So with all of that, Congress, as well as other bodies on the state and local level, are trying to do their best to address the challenges we see in front of it. So we're going to see direct support for hospitality, or for both hospitality as well as other kinds of funding for small businesses, for some of the businesses that have most been impacted by this, and then eventually getting people back to work. And that's what we're going to seeing in the future. But most importantly, there are assistance opportunities on the state and local level, about 80,000 programs across the U.S. alone that were in place in February, that are in place in April, and May, and June, and July, and so on. And we think that there's a lot of state and local opportunities that are going to be developed as both entities go through their processes to help companies both go through this very, very unprecedented, challenging time, and then also getting people back to work. But just remember that if you've exhausted your opportunities through the PPP, if you've exhausted your opportunities through other things, there's a lot of great programs on the state and local level. Today, though, we're going to focus on incentives, but incentives after you've received them. So the compliance aspect of incentives, the aftercare, what happens after you start receiving some aid. What are the different things to think about when it comes to the paperwork, the aftercare? And it's important too that even if you, way before you get involved in making your ask, requesting what it is that you need help with, these are the kind of things to think about from a strategic point of view that just you need to get ready for. There's no such thing as free money in this world, and you're going to have to commit. You're going to have to fill out paperwork. You're going to have to go through a series of processes. That's incredibly important. And the first one, I can't stress enough, is today in a pandemic, recessionary period, it could be even worse. You've got to look at your total risk profile in regards to incentives. So if you have incentives in place today, you absolutely have to conduct an incentive risk assessment. You can do that internally. You can use a provider to do it. You can use a partner to do it. All it means is that you've got to look at everything that's inclusive to where you are today and where you might be tomorrow. So is your business able to continue to operate during the pandemic? In this first wave, in wave 2, wave 3, wave 4, whatever happens in the future, don't just look at what's happening today. Look at what may happen in the future, your concentration risk, your density risk, as what's already being discussed in the news media right now. What's going to happen under future waves? What's going to happen in the winter next year, at the end of this year, in the next year? As we're all hoping that a vaccine is going to be ready and that we can eradicate COVID-19 in the near future, what are we doing to protect these commitments that we've made? And if you can't make a commitment and you had to reduce or furlough staff, change your operation, unable to operate, whatever it is, how are you then getting ready to communicate that with your local, state, and federal economic development officials, or just those stakeholders that you're dealing with at the Department of Revenue, Department of Labor, whatever it is, Franchise Tax Board, whatever that jurisdiction is? How are you preparing? And ask yourself, as part of that risk assessment, these questions that you have on your screen. And then most importantly, once you've finished that assessment, make sure that you know what some of those force majeure clauses are. How does force majeure not only relate to you as a business, but there's commitments that the economic development team, the state team, the infrastructure team that might be providing key services to you, what are some of their obligations under force majeure? It's always a two-way street. It's not a business versus economic development, it's everyone's on the same team, especially after you've received or started to receive benefits. So there are obligations that a company has to make, and there are obligations that the government has to make. And then those force majeure and other related clauses can affect both. What does that mean? And you've got to include that into your assessment as well. On top of it, transparency and accountability has been on the forefront of the credits and incentives discussion for a long time, and it's important. We feel, and I feel personally, it's extremely important that this process is as transparent as it could be. There's a lot of confidential and proprietary information. It's key that companies need to be protected. That information is important. You can't put personally identifiable information out there, people's social security numbers, their addresses, even who they are. So there's been a lot of transparency discussions and statutes and things that have gone through a lot of state and local legislature and councils and everything in between to help mitigate some of these realistically. But on top of it, there's going to be a lot of transparency and accountability in the future as well. Anybody that's taking federal benefits today that's all of a sudden become available through the SBA or some other agency, there's going to be an accountability phase later, if not, as you're already recognizing now. So absolutely think about the commitments that you're making. And if you have made a commitment and you can't live up to it for no fault of your own because of the pandemic or otherwise, your supply chains have been cut. You can't operate one of your facilities and you just can't hire people that you had committed to. Well, that's okay. It's really important. Conduct your risk assessment and then start to approach your local and state government. And we're going to talk about what that means here in a moment. But before we do, let's talk about incentive strategy around compliance in the first place. So what's really important and some of the best practices as you even get involved in incentives, as you look at not just capturing opportunities to help with cost savings and training and others, but what are the legal underpinnings to it? How can you best make sure that your proprietary and confidential information is fully protected as you disclose it, even in an unlimited basis, and then their aftercare and assistance is as robust as possible. So when we look at a comprehensive support structure, we look at things like where auditing may need to take place, where other things may need to happen, and where that support may take place. Legislative changes that are going to occur. A lot of state legislators are going to get back to work here soon, either scheduled or under very special sessions to try to help businesses as best they can on a state and local level. And that's already starting to happen, which is great. A lot of governors have set up task force, a lot of things that are going to start happening. Pay close attention to our microsite, the one that I share with you at the beginning. We'll share it at the end, because we're going to be updating a lot of things that are happening in real time, but there's going to be a lot of different state and local elected officials and those bodies trying to get things done. But there's a few pointers that we wanted to give before we get into what's happening now. Just how can you help within an organization, or as an economic developer, how can you give some guidance on just to make sure the compliance is as best cared as possible? Number one is that you've got to create some kind of a guidebook. Many companies, possibly even internally, have guidebooks. This is kind of an example of what we do. But that guidebook helps as people often transition within companies themselves. That guidebook can stay with that position. So as one person, John or Jane Doe, goes to another opportunity within a company or maybe outside of that company and says, all right, compliance now, you're the point of contact. You're in charge of this. And here's a guidebook you can use to help best serve your internal customers and work with economic developers. It's extremely important. Within that guidebook, we often every day coach companies to say there are about 5 different really important points. Identify a compliance team and have a single point of contact if you can. Create a reporting process. Make sure that you're keeping the best records as possible and holding them in a place where they're locked up for future future people that might be in this role. And then if there's ever an audit, make sure you're prepared for that audit in advance so that you understand what might be asked of you. So you're not scrambling when the request might come in some future years. And then if there is a penalty or callback, understanding what the risk profile might be at the beginning. And then in a situation like we're in now, understand what that might be, and then open up a dialogue. The first thing is that from a compliance team standpoint, understand what it is that we can do. So the first thing, if we're involved in that process, usually there's an associate or an analyst that's assigned to that, or a team if there's a strategic partner. If you have a strategic partner, you're going to do the same thing. It's important to do that. That there's 1 or 2 or 3 people assigned to this effort, and then that team's going to be dedicated to make sure you get all these things done. Then internally, make sure that there's the organizational stakeholders and support that's there. Corporate tax, payroll, human resources, treasury, procurement, you name it. There are people identified as part of that compliance, that compliance network, so that you can easily tap into that person, pull reports, and do some other things that we'll talk about here in a second. Reporting processes. So got to make sure you get all the data, that you request that data early, and that you are able to get to that information, go through all that process, go through all that analysis, go through all that, those step-by-step things that are important, that not only that the government's going to require you to do and hand over, but that you can do for your own fiduciary responsibilities internal. If you're a publicly traded company, you have to often report different aspects of your government grants and incentives on your publicly geared reporting documentation, depending on what jurisdiction you're in. But at the end of the day, just as you need to report to different governments in that specific kind of aspect, you'll want to work with the project manager, the point of contact, and then all of these different people we just referenced, to make sure that both the data has been procured internally and that you review it in a holistic way. Ensure all those documents are properly organized and then executed, ready to go before you transmit over to the government. You do not want to do a 75% job. It always needs to be 100%. If you have questions, though, before you officially transmit, reach out to those economic development representatives and those partners. Even if you have never really interacted with them before, and you've just really hit the submit button and that's it, reach out. There's many economic development professionals right now that are proactively reaching out to companies all across the U.S. and beyond. But if you've never made a connection, definitely make a connection if you can now, because there's a lot of companies that are struggling at the moment to try to make sure they're hitting the commitment levels. And on the economic development side, many of those representatives are there to help. And then, of course, from a record-keeping standpoint, we have a system that we use called the Public Incentive Management System, but there's Dropbox, there's shared systems, folders, whatever it is. The company may be required, outside of your own internal record-keeping requirements and legal requirements, the company might be required in the different, both the statutes you have to follow as well as the agreements that you've signed on to, that you need to keep some semblance of records moving forward for a certain amount of time. Sometimes it's limited, and sometimes it's pretty extensive. The thing is, and I'll emphasize this because it's important, is that sometimes the documents that you send, when we think about risk mitigation, sometimes the documents that you send are actually this could be scrubbed, but they're actually put into a public database of some sort. If it's not the actual data, if it's not the actual documents, it's the information that you supplied in those documents are put into a system that the public, the news media, and sometimes folks that mull through all this information can access. And there's many news outlets and many individuals, private individuals, that will do information requests to gather this information as well. So before you submit, it's incredibly important you have it all organized, and that you also know what information could become public in the future. Most importantly, in a situation where you might have a callback, which means you may have to pay something back, there's all those pieces of documents, information, and otherwise is all organized in a way that again, if there's a risk of public disclosure in any way, that is fully vetted before ever hitting the send button or submit button. One of the things you could do to help mitigate some of the risks around that is to, if you've got an agreement, evaluate that agreement, see what different components you might have. If you think that you're in a situation there where that risk is increased, you may not be able to, you've encountered a situation where you may not be able to make the commitment you thought. Absolutely engage the local government informally, absolutely engage the state government informally. We have not met an economic development individual in my long career in this space where they haven't wanted to try to help a business get through hard times. And this is another one that we're facing now, all of us together in this difficult period. So all these different jurisdictions want to help. And what they want to do is figure out two things. They want to figure out if there's ways where you don't have to have a big cataclysmic event where you've got to repay or create some kind of negative outcome. They want to avoid that negative outcome because that's in everybody's interest. And so, but before you engage with a local and state or federal or any other kind of agency or organization, make sure you've got a strategy and a plan in place. And we're going to talk about that here in a few minutes. So let's spend a few minutes though talking about how both states and communities are addressing the current situation today and then into the future and what's happening. It's some early days in regards to the way that states and communities are starting to address this pretty critical situation. It's early days because it's only been a few weeks for some communities. It's been maybe a month and a half or 2 months for others. Outside of the U.S., it's been a few months, and about 6 months in total. And so this is relatively new, and its impacts are only now being felt across the whole economy. It's clear that the economic recession that's been in place now is going to be with us for some time. It's clear that things are not going to rebound quickly. And I'm a very optimistic person, and I want it to rebound quickly. But it's clear that it's going to take some time. Just as of today, here in the United States, we're very close to, if not at 30 million, over 30 million individuals having applied for unemployment assistance or some kind of aid directly as an individual itself. That may be only a reflection of how fast our infrastructure can get those people into the programs itself. We believe as our economics modeling and our economists are going through their process, that number is much more significant than that. And so part of what states and communities are going to address is just how to be as flexible as possible. And that's going to happen in real time. Certain states like Maine and Illinois have addressed this right away, are all in compliance. Others will catch up quickly. And we are, as states and communities, counties, municipalities, even utilities are addressing this challenge. We're putting it onto our microsite, incentives.hickeyandAssociates.com, as fast as we can so that you can be made aware of those changes. But those are only the basic details. A lot of entities, economic development or otherwise, are really just saying, hey, engage us, try to figure out a solution. We're suggesting before you do that, make sure so that we can optimize the time as best as we can. Those economic development professionals, those stakeholders at the state and local level, they are incredibly busy. You can imagine all the things that you're dealing with and within your business and your company and even at home. We've got 3 kids at home, 2 of which are going through an educational exercise as we speak. So not only is my wife and I teachers, but we're the principals, and we're also, of course, operating a business, taking associates, and it's just an unprecedented time. So the more that you can make a specific request and say, here is what we need, the faster probably a solution will be created, if it can be right now. So Maine and Illinois are two examples of two states that have already gone through and said, all right, any kind of submission deadline, we're going to move it from April 15th to May 15th regarding to those corporate accountability reports for the incentives in place. Maine, something similar. Anybody that's tapped into the Pine Tree Development Zone, which is a great program. If you're operating in Maine in any way, it's a beautiful state, so you're lucky already. But with this program, it's a great program to look at too. If you haven't taken advantage of it and you have operations in Maine, definitely take a close look at it. But if you're in compliance and you've got a deadline you've got to focus on, the good news is that between April 15th, you're able to move that towards May 1st. And we anticipate that many states, including these two, may extend that given the circumstances in both. Illinois and Maine are two states that have been hit hard by the pandemic. And a lot of it has to do with businesses not being able to really get all the data together, but also the government officials are working from home. And we're all affected in this, and we're all in it together. Michigan is another great state that has been very adversely impacted by COVID-19, and they've started to put into effect ways specifically to incentives that there can be some short-term and long-term relief. So there are some temporary relief measures put into their strategic fund. Many companies have tapped into that. It's a very important incentive program. But both borrowers and grantees on a case-by-case basis can be given some relief temporarily. Engage the state right away, or use your provider or third party to do that right away. It's extremely important. Those that don't engage will not get relief, so you have to do that right away. And that probably is a good set of advice for anyone. There's payment deferments, extensions of milestones, you name it. It's very robust. Engage the state of Michigan and that entity, MEDC, immediately, and that will only help. In New Jersey, the Commonwealth of New Jersey has actually had some pretty good programs that assisted a lot of great companies over the last handful of years. It's had some controversy for sure, but more importantly, right now as we experience this situation that we're in, the state of New Jersey has shifted some of the workplace, environmental, other requirements for most of their programs. So one of the important ones is that the individuals that were qualifying to be incentivized in the first place through programs like Grow New Jersey. The NGEDA has waived and extended some of those eligibility requirements when it comes to the 80% rule, for instance, that person had to spend 80% of their time, that employee, in a facility. Well, that's not practical. All of us are at home. I'm in the New York area myself, and so we've been at home for quite some time. Some of us a month and a half, a couple months now. So it's something that it's been very welcome that the state of New Jersey and the EDA rather has had some flexibility. So if you haven't engaged the EDA yet, do that right away. And that we're expecting the state of New Jersey, under the governor's leadership, as well as NGEDA, to give some more flexibility in the future. Vermont. So there's a little bit of a different program that we want to talk about today. It's different from just compliance. These are actually shifts away from what we're used to in working in offices. Even a lot of people had some flexibility, but we think that in the future, kind of wearing our other hat on the location strategy side, there's a lot of states that are going to have to look at programs that are going to incentivize people to work from home or have some kind of remote working situation, workplace, what have you. Vermont already has a great program in the books, and we want to mention a couple today, Vermont and Utah, that we think could be forebearers onto what other states and communities may look upon as ways to help companies continue to employ folks. And then if you're the benefactor of having that person working in your jurisdiction, to make sure that companies, even from far away, are incentivized and induced to allow those people to work. So in Vermont, there's already a remote working program in place, gives up to $10,000 US over 2 years if you're a remote worker, have expenses, including the computer software and so on. Great program. Another one mentioned a moment ago is in Utah, which is a little bit different. So Vermont is more about the individual. Utah is about the company. So the business can capture up to about about $250,000 a year, each year in this benefit, up to $6,000 US per new job that qualifies in a remote area. Much of Utah is remote. A lot of really great people already are remote working. And for companies that are operating in Utah or thinking about operating in Utah, this can be a great benefit to tap into. Your labor shed all of a sudden goes from maybe the Wasatch Front all of a sudden to the entire state by utilizing this program. It's great. And look into this if you're operating in Utah or thinking about operating in Utah in the future. And we believe there's quite a few states in the future that are going to adopt this. And on the committee level, legislatively, in many state houses, they're already thinking about it. So taking a step back, navigating all this compliance, a few very effective, proactive pieces of advice. So understand your commitments. Look at your agreements if you haven't already. Very important to look at the fine print, the terms and conditions, and look at what not only you've committed to, but the milestones and how that all works mechanically and technically. Develop a roadmap. Share that roadmap with your stakeholders. I mentioned a few of them earlier, your finance, accounting, HR, and those business leaders that are in charge of the operation that's committed to this. A lot of those people change. A lot of those people are going to change. As many individuals are furloughed, some of those folks may not come back. They might find other positions or what have you. So it's more important than ever to make sure a roadmap is in place and you have totally looked at your in totality, your risk mitigation profile. Plan for the milestones, plan for the submissions, and then part of which a lot of companies get surprised about is that they may not have received the incentives. So you spent so much time worrying about the risks. Some companies spend very little time on making sure they've actually received the check, because a lot of communities will send a physical check, and we're not used to that in this day and age. We're used to electronic transfers and wires and things just happening automatically. That's not the case in government. Literally, what happens is the check might be sent, and I'm not saying the governments don't do it. They will send the check if you filled out the forms correctly and you've hit all the things you've committed to. The problem is the check gets sent maybe to the local facility or to a whole nother facility that was an address on record when you first applied for the incentives. And it gets totally lost because who on earth knows what to do with a paper check as it's come to some accounts receivable or payable person at a distant location. So the challenge is often making sure that not only you're in compliance, but you've actually received those benefits. And that's an important remainder of the life cycle. And just being proactive is key. So I can't emphasize enough, and we're coaching a lot of companies in this regard. Absolutely do an incentive risk assessment today, tomorrow, right away. You probably know what you've got and what you're committed to, but if you don't, take a look at everything again. If you don't think you're going to hit the obligations you've originally committed to, it's okay. It's at no fault of your own that the pandemic has occurred. It's an unbelievable place that we're in. Unbelievable, unfathomable. You know all the different words that have been used and the ways to describe it. But many companies are not going to hit their incentive commitments. Government knows that. They absolutely knew that. They knew that from the moment that this started happening. And many governments between Michigan and Nevada and New York and Florida are preparing for this. Many of them have given guidance. I can tell you firsthand, they are all absolutely preparing for this. So before you talk to the government, make sure you develop a strategy and what you're going to request. It's not, hey, I need help. It's, hey, I know I am not going to meet this obligation. but it's going to be short term. And I think, you know what, I promised 300 jobs. I think we're only going to hit 150 over the next 2 years. But you know what? I'm optimistic we are going to get to that 300. It's just we can only open up one line at a time. We've shut down all manufacturing because of health and safety. We're going to only have to create one line certification at a given moment. It's going to take me a year to get my manufacturing operation. We can't, it's impossible to hit these obligations. But here is what we see the future is going to be right now anyway. Can we realign some of my incentive strategy and my commitments with these new, and a lot of governments will be extremely flexible. Most governments will be extremely flexible. And if they can't, the one thing they might do is maybe rip up what you've gotten previous and start over again. So you don't lose the benefits, but there's just a new agreement in place. And most elected officials, as that's where a lot of direction is being given on the local and state level, absolutely want to help businesses right now. There's nothing more important than helping the incumbent businesses in a community right at this moment. And because we're lucky enough to speak to so many economic development representatives at any given time, that's for the C of that kind of approach is clearly there. But what they all say pretty unanimously is just come to us with an ask that we can quickly put into our modeling and our processes, and we can help you faster that way. So develop a strategy, come up with an ask, and then when you're ready, engage with those local and state level economic development organizations, agencies, people, whatever it is. There's regional authorities, there's state, there's local. Some of you may not have been part of the project that procured incentives in the first place. So it may be a new introduction. You know, start with just saying hi, but just remember one thing, have the ask that we've talked about, but also just be careful in the information that you share, because sometimes email, sometimes communications, especially electronic and paper, can be applicable to some of these information requests. Sometimes they're not. So one of the first questions to ask besides, hi, you know, hopefully you're healthy and safe, is that just give me some initial guidance on me as a company. Give me some initial guidance on things I should or should not do as far as communications, confidentiality, and so on. And there's some great, we have some great advice that we've got in the public sphere. And if you need any help in that regard, we're certainly here to help. One of the things, and where we have a lot of this information, this data is on our website, the incentives.hickensassociates.com is our microsite, our clearinghouse to be able to assist businesses in every way we can, open source and otherwise. And then I mentioned this early on, we're doing a lot of different webinars, and not just for the US, but there's two here that if you're curious, if you're following our social media and on our website, you'll see the invitations for both of these. They're coming up, one on the 29th and one on the 30th. The one on the left is for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. The one on the right is Asia Pacific and Australia. But just we're not only helping companies navigate this in the US and North America, but all over on almost every continent. There's even some grants in Antarctica that we're assisting with at the moment. But every continent has incentive opportunities, and every continent, there are already over $10 trillion US worth of aid already out there. Scotland has $1 billion fund. Australia set up literally hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars worth of opportunities to help companies get back to work. Singapore, Vietnam, Japan, you name it. Japan has set up an enormous fund to help Japanese companies navigate the new normal and maybe diversify a bit. So the US will absolutely have a recovery package soon, probably a few months from now, but state and local communities will get going on that earlier in every level all around the world, from different provinces to prefectures to different municipalities and regions, you name it. They're all going to try to get people back to work. And so we're going to be talking about this on these two webinars coming up here. So feel free to register for those, and you can find the links on how to register on any of our social media platforms. And then any of our websites and such. But also feel free to reach out to me or any of our team members globally if we can ever be of assistance, or just point you in the right direction. I can't tell you how many calls I've gotten from small to some of the largest businesses out there, and especially the Main Street companies. We want to help in every way we can. We want to point them in the right direction. We want to get people back to work. That's our goal, and we're just so excited that you could join us today. Learn a little bit more about the compliance end of this, what to do, how to position, what we're seeing right away. And we do anticipate doing a lot more of these webinars as best we can as more information becomes available. But again, come to our website, thatincentives.hickey&associates.com, for the latest and greatest. And we just appreciate you all joining today. I want to next open it up to any questions you have, and we've got a few here, which is great. If anyone does have any questions, feel free to put them here online. I'll address a couple of them here before we end up closing here near the top of the hour. So first, a great question about compliance. What if I know if I've already missed my my deadline and I am absolutely not going to be no longer in compliance with the incentive agreement I have with I won't mention the state, but the state in the Southeast. Good question. Thank you. It's important because one, you're technically in default. That's okay. It just means that because you are not able to meet that milestone, for I'm sure no fault of your own, you're not able to. You didn't give the specifics, but many of the companies we're helping, they can't hire. They can't physically hire people. They can't interview. They can't get people, so they're not able to now meet some of the obligations they otherwise would have. Set up a strategy. Determine what you're going to ask for, and start to engage the local officials and the state officials. In your case, you mentioned state. Unfortunately, some of the state officials that you might be dealing with in an IRS or revenue situation aren't as robust and easy to deal with as you would maybe in economic development, or the business development folks you started with when you first set up your project. And everyone's inundated. Best thing to do is, again, go in with a strategy, what you need, what you're asking for, be open and transparent, and the process will start from there. But always ask about disclosures of confidentiality and otherwise, because what we don't want to see happen is that you engage the government and they accidentally identify you as in default or otherwise. So just make sure you're asking all those questions up front, and that'll be important. Another question here, which I think is great too, is that because of your supply, you're asking, my supply chain has changed dramatically over the last 6 months due to trade and now the pandemic. Also, I may not be able to meet some of my incentive obligations, and I may want to look to new sites to grow. What's your advice? So I think right now, making sure that you understand your location strategy is key. Understanding your labor analytics, understanding where the thing that I've given a lot of advice on, and our whole team has for sure too, is the same things that existed back in February or even in March and today is going to exist in the future. There are still trade tariffs in place. All the ones that existed there are still there. There's a whole myriad of regulatory things that have actually been paused too. So there's since then. And then of course the war on talent still exists. There's still going to be in the future a finite amount of skills to fit the kinds of jobs we're going to need into the future. There's still a lot of automating. There's still a lot of things that we're going to need to be concerned about that were with us in February, March, and January and last year. So just consider all those things in your strategy. And as you want to look at future opportunities in regards to incentives, look at the risk profile and that you've got currently. And just when you're ready with that strategy, have a conversation with the community or the state or whatever agency or entity that you have aid with at the moment, and just describe what you have in front of you. They might have tools now in the future that they might be able to introduce that whatever the cost difference is, they might be able to help you with more aid and opportunity. It all depends on where you are, but just don't walk away from a site without engaging the local economic and state economic development folks, because they might be able to help you in ways you never considered to stay. And I think that's important. With that, we really appreciate everybody. If we've got a few other questions that we'll try to follow up with directly, but thank you, everyone. As I mentioned, this meeting will be recorded and posted on our social media as well as on our website. Really appreciate to our team who helped build this content and build these slides. Thank you as well. And we hope everyone's safe, healthy. Remember to wash your hands and to practice very important social distancing. We hope you all well and appreciate your time today. Thank you.